You're about to put an offer on your dream California home. Great weather, good schools, reasonable mortgage payments compared to San Francisco or LA. Then you check the mail and find a letter requiring you to buy flood insurance. Wait, flood insurance in sunny California? Here's what nobody talks about until it's too late. 1 in 5 Californians lives in an area at serious flood risk. That's over 7 million people. And the wildest part? Flooding causes more damage in California than earthquakes, more than wildfires. It's the most widespread natural disaster in the entire state, hitting all 58 counties with severe damage throughout history. But here's where it gets interesting. Some of the state's most flood-prone cities are also becoming its hottest destinations for people tired of paying Bay Area prices. The same cities where water could reach your doorstep offer homes at half the cost, thriving job markets, and lifestyles that coastal California residents can only dream about. So which cities are we talking about? And more importantly, should you still consider them? Because the answer might surprise you. Let me show you something that changes everything. In 1862, a series of storms hit California for 43 days straight. Not 43 hours, 43 days. The entire Central Valley turned into an inland sea, stretching 300 miles long and 20 miles wide. Ships literally sailed over farmland. Sacramento sat under 10 feet of water for 3 months. The state capital had to move to San Francisco temporarily. 1/4 of California's cattle drowned. 1/3 of the state's property was destroyed. The crazy part? Scientists now say climate change has already made a repeat event 234% more likely. And when it happens, it could cause over $1 trillion in damage. That's 5 times worse than Hurricane Katrina. So let's talk about Stockton. Second most flood-prone city in America, according to recent studies. 93% of homes face flood risk in the next 30 years. When I first saw that number, I thought it had to be wrong. But then I looked at the geography. Stockton sits right at the mouth of the San Joaquin River. It's basically a bowl waiting to fill up during the wrong storm. The levees protecting Stockton? They were built decades ago. Many sections failed to meet modern safety standards. Some haven't seen major upgrades since the 1990s. Sacramento got billions invested in flood protection over the last 20 years. Stockton got a fraction of that. The government only started serious construction on critical levee improvements in the last few years, with completion not expected until the early 2030s. Here's what really happens during atmospheric rivers, those massive bands of tropical moisture that slam into California. When they hit, water rises fast. The San Joaquin and Calaveras rivers converge right in Stockton. Add Sierra snowmelt to winter storms, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Most of the city sits in what experts call the 200-year floodplain. That sounds safe until you realize climate change is making these rare events happen way more often. In 1997, major flooding led to evacuations across parts of Stockton. Residents still remember. But what happened after? The population kept growing, housing developments kept getting built. Because here's the thing nobody mentions. People choose Stockton knowing the risks. Why? The median home price in Stockton hovers around $420,000. Compare that to San Francisco's $1.5 million or even Sacramento's $465,000. You get an actual house with a yard for your family instead of a cramped apartment. The commute to the Bay Area is doable if you're willing to drive. Some tech workers figured out they can live in Stockton on remote days and save hundreds of thousands of dollars. The diversity draws people too. Stockton ranks among the most diverse cities in America. Over 800,000 people called the metro area home, representing cultures from across the globe. There's a community here, a sense of place that gentrified coastal cities lost years ago. But the affordability comes with a cost. And I'm not just talking about flood insurance, though that's becoming brutal. I'm talking about infrastructure that hasn't kept pace with growth, schools that struggle with funding, a city government that faced bankruptcy not that long ago. The economic distress is real in certain neighborhoods. Still, something's changing. Major investments are finally arriving. That $1.95 billion Lower San Joaquin River project broke ground recently. When completed, it'll provide improved protection for 122,000 residents and nearly $29 billion in property. The 10-mile slow levee project is targeting the most critically deficient section of the entire Central Valley levee system. These projects take years, but they're happening, which raises a question. Is now actually the best time to buy in Stockton before the improvements are done, while prices remain relatively low, betting on future protection? That's a gamble, and gambling with your family's safety and financial future isn't something to take lightly. Now let's talk about Sacramento, the state capital. 86% of homes at major flood risk, fourth most flood-prone city in the country. But unlike Stockton, Sacramento got serious about flood protection years ago. After devastating floods in 1986, the Army Corps of Engineers reassessed everything. They estimated a 100-year flood could cause $15 billion in damage and kill 100 people. FEMA redrew the maps, putting most of Sacramento in the 100-year floodplain. That was the wake-up call. Since then, $5.5 billion poured into flood protection infrastructure over 2 decades. They fixed levees, raised Folsom Dam, built weirs and bypasses. The Sacramento Weir, completed in 1916, has 48 gates that manually release floodwaters when the river hits critical levels. The Yola bypass to the west can handle 80% of the system's floodwaters, redirecting them away from populated areas. Does all this engineering make Sacramento safe? Not exactly. It makes it safer. Climate change is intensifying atmospheric rivers. These storms carry more water now because warmer air holds more moisture. The old flood control infrastructure was designed 50 or more years ago before anyone considered climate change impacts. Recent studies show concerning trends. That catastrophic megaflood from 1862, climate change has doubled the likelihood of a similar event. Scientists ran computer models simulating what would happen today. The results weren't pretty. Even with all the improvements, a true megaflood would overwhelm the system. But here's what makes Sacramento different from Stockton. They're not done building. An $8 billion project is currently more than halfway complete, with finish date targeted for the end of this decade. They're modernizing the entire flood protection system to meet not just today's standards, but tomorrow's climate reality. Officials have started incorporating climate change projections into their planning. Additional storage at Folsom Lake and 3 other reservoirs is in the works. They're expanding capacity to handle bigger, more intense storms. It's a constant race against rising risks. So should you move to Sacramento despite the flood risk? Let's look at what you're actually getting. The median home price sits around $465,000 as of early 2025. That's dramatically cheaper than Bay Area coastal cities, but more expensive than Stockton. You're getting a premium for that extra flood protection and everything else Sacramento offers. The job market is incredibly stable. Government jobs employ a huge portion of the workforce. State government isn't going anywhere. That provides economic resilience even during recessions. Healthcare is booming due to the aging population and expanding medical facilities. Education sector jobs through California State University, Sacramento add more stability. Tech companies have been quietly moving in too, attracted by lower costs compared to Silicon Valley. The unemployment rate hovers around 3.8%. That's better than state and national averages. Housing inventory remains tight, with homes selling at about 22 days on average. Multiple offers are common. People want to live here. The lifestyle factors matter too. You're 90 minutes from San Francisco, 2 hours from Napa Valley wine country, 2 hours from Lake Tahoe skiing and hiking. Sacramento itself has transformed its downtown over the past decade. Farm-to-table restaurants, craft breweries, art galleries, music venues, dozens of farmers markets, tree-lined streets throughout older neighborhoods, actual seasons with hot summers and mild winters. For families, the school districts in suburbs like Elk Grove and Roseville get high ratings. The housing is newer out there. And speaking of Roseville, that city deserves its own mention. After destructive floods in the 1980s and 1990s, Roseville became a national model for flood preparedness. They restricted development close to creeks, creating bike paths and recreation areas that also serve as natural flood mitigation. Result? Roseville regularly tops best places to live lists in California. No flood problems, reasonable housing prices, quality of life that's hard to beat. Back to Sacramento proper, though, the flood risk is real but manageable if you're smart about it. Check the flood maps before buying. FEMA's special flood hazard areas tell you where risks are highest. Properties in those zones require flood insurance if you have a federally backed mortgage. That insurance isn't cheap, but it's protection. Only about 7% of California households at risk actually carry flood insurance. Less than 24% of those in the highest risk zones have coverage. Why? Partly cost, partly denial, partly confusion about whether they need it. Standard homeowners insurance doesn't cover flooding. You need a separate policy through the National Flood Insurance Program or private insurers. Here's what tripped me up when researching.
FEMA's flood maps don't show everything. They focus on riverine and coastal flooding. They miss urban flooding from overwhelmed storm drains during extreme rainfall. They don't fully account for climate change making rare events more common. First Street Foundation created more detailed flood risk assessments that paint a different picture in many areas. The difference between FEMA maps and First Street's models can be dramatic. A house FEMA rates as low risk might show substantial risk in First Street's data. Always check multiple sources. Look at the actual elevation. Ask longtime residents about flooding history. Drive through the neighborhood after heavy rain. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Let me tell you about Redwood City. This Silicon Valley city has the absolute highest risk of severe coastal floods of any California city. 27% of the population lives in areas at risk of a 100-year flood happening in the next 25 years. That's over 22,000 people. Coastal flooding is a different beast than riverine flooding. It's about sea level rise, storm surge, and king tides. Redwood City's shoreline is long and convoluted, the result of decades filling in tidal wetlands to create buildable land. Some areas already flood during annual king tide events. With just 1 foot of sea level rise, multiple locations will be underwater regularly. The projections are sobering. By 2050, with 3.3 feet of sea level rise, Redwood shores would be completely inundated during a 100-year storm event. Highway 101 would be overtopped. Parts of downtown Redwood City and the Friendly Acres neighborhood would flood. About 59% of the city faces flood risk in the next 30 years. Think about what's at risk. The Silicon Valley Clean Water Treatment Plant, Samtrans Bus Depot, Kaiser Hospital Emergency Center, the Port of Redwood City, County Jail, mobile home parks, over 80 miles of roadway, 27 hazardous material sites, 6 outpatient healthcare facilities. The economic impact of flooding would be staggering. One study estimated $9 billion in property damage, affecting residential parcels housing 21,000 people and 568 commercial parcels. So why does anyone live there? Because it's Silicon Valley. The jobs, the innovation, the opportunities. Median household incomes are sky high. The weather is nearly perfect year-round. You're minutes from seeing in the coastal hills. And Redwood City is fighting back. They've got levees around Redwood shores that currently protect critical infrastructure and 11,500 residents. But FEMA notified them in 2020 that unless the levee system gets modified, flood insurance rate maps will be revised. That would require about 4,700 households to purchase flood insurance. The city launched the Redwood Shores Sea Level Rise Protection Project. They're raising and strengthening levees while integrating nature-based solutions where possible. They're working with the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District on multi-jurisdictional planning. The state mandated that all local governments along the shoreline prepare adaptation plans by 2034. The question is whether they can build fast enough. Sea level rise is accelerating. 16 inches by 2050 is basically guaranteed, already baked into ocean heating. It could be much more depending on how fast ice sheets melt. The uncertainty makes long-term planning difficult. But here's what shocked me while researching. Despite all this known risk, housing prices in Redwood City remain strong. Demand stays high. People keep moving there because the opportunities outweigh the risks in their calculation. A career in tech can set you up financially in ways that flood insurance costs don't offset. That brings up an uncomfortable truth about flood-prone cities. Wealthy people can afford to live in risky areas because they can afford the insurance, the retrofitting, the eventual relocation if needed. It's lower-income residents who get trapped. Studies show communities of color in low-income neighborhoods face disproportionate flood risk throughout California. Historic redlining pushed these communities into the least desirable, highest-risk areas. They lack resources for flood control upgrades and post-flood recovery. When disasters hit, it's always the poorest neighborhoods that suffer most. They can't afford elevation certificates, structural modifications, or flood insurance premiums that are rising as FEMA updates risk assessments. They lose everything and have no safety net to rebuild. Meanwhile, wealthier neighborhoods get their levees built first, their homes elevated, their properties protected. This is happening across California's flood-prone cities. In Stockton, the diverse working-class communities bear the brunt of inadequate infrastructure. In Sacramento, lower-income areas along the rivers see the worst flooding. In Redwood City, mobile home parks face catastrophic risk, while tech executives in the hills remain dry. This has to be talked about when you discuss moving to flood-prone cities. If you have financial resources, you have options. You can choose where to buy, afford the insurance, make your home more resilient. If you're struggling economically, you're at the mercy of aging infrastructure and disasters you can't prepare for. So, where does this leave you if you're considering a move? Let me break down the real calculation you need to make. Start with the flood risk. Don't just look at FEMA maps. Check First Street's flood factor data. Look at the historical flooding in the specific neighborhood. Talk to your insurance agent about costs before making an offer. Some properties are uninsurable. Others have premiums that'll blow your budget. Then look at the infrastructure investments. Are major flood protection projects underway or completed in that city? Sacramento's billions in improvements make it safer than Stockton's aging levees. Redwood City's active adaptation planning beats cities ignoring the problem. Communities that take flood risk seriously and invest accordingly give you better odds. Consider the elevation. Higher ground within a flood-prone city dramatically reduces your personal risk. That house on the hill might cost more, but it could save you during the disaster that's coming. Sacramento residents learned this lesson. After the 1862 flood, the city raised its downtown 10 to 15 feet. Governor Stanford lifted his mansion up a full story. They weren't messing around. Think about your timeline. If you're buying a forever home to pass down to your kids, you're betting on 50 or 75 years of relative stability. That's a big bet given climate change accelerating. If you're planning to sell in 5 to 10 years, you may come out ahead as flood protection improves and the area develops, but you're also gambling that buyers will want to take on that risk down the line. Factor in the total economic picture. What are you saving on housing? What are the job opportunities? Is the quality of life worth the risk? For many people moving from the Bay Area to Sacramento, saving $500,000 on a home is life-changing. They can actually afford to buy instead of renting forever. They can save for retirement, pay for their kids' college, build wealth. The flood risk is real, but so is being priced out of home ownership entirely. The lifestyle upgrades matter too. Bigger homes, yards for your kids to play in, better schools in some suburbs, shorter commutes, less stress, more time with family. You can't put a price on that. Many families decide the improved daily quality of life justifies taking on some flood risk, especially if they're smart about insurance and preparation. But you have to be honest with yourself. Can you afford to lose everything? Even with insurance, there's displacement, stress, rebuilding. Some people never fully recover from disasters. It changes your life trajectory. If you're financially vulnerable, if you're stretching to afford the house, if you have no emergency savings, maybe the risk is too high regardless of the benefits. Now, let me tell you what I think happens next in these cities. The flood protection investments will continue because they have to. Climate change isn't slowing down, atmospheric rivers are getting worse, sea levels keep rising. States and federal government will pour more billions into infrastructure because the alternative is abandoning major population centers. That's not happening. Sacramento, Stockton, Redwood City, all these places will see continued improvements. But it's a race. Can they build fast enough to keep ahead of accelerating risks? That's the real question. Some cities will win that race. Others won't. Your job as a potential resident is figuring out which is which. Sacramento looks like it's staying ahead so far. The commitment is there, the money's flowing, the projects are getting done. The Civic will exist to protect the capital city. I'd bet on Sacramento over the next 20 years. Stockton is playing catch-up. The investments finally started, but they're behind schedule and behind Sacramento's level of protection. The next decade is critical. If those major levee projects finish on time and work as designed, Stockton could be okay. If they get delayed or underfunded, that's when things get dicey. Higher risk, but also higher reward if you time it right. Redwood City and other coastal cities face the toughest challenge. You can't build a levee tall enough to stop sea level rise forever. Eventually, some low-lying areas will have to be abandoned or completely reimagined. The wealthy ones will figure it out. They'll build innovative solutions, floating developments, manage retreat, nature-based protection, but it'll be expensive and disruptive. Here's what keeps me up at night about California's flood risk: the lack of urgency among regular people. Most residents in these cities don't think about flooding day to day. They know it's a risk in theory, but it doesn't change their behavior. They don't have flood insurance. They don't have emergency plans. They assume it won't happen to them. That's human nature. We're bad at preparing for low probability, high impact events. But climate change is making these events higher probability. The once in 200 years flood might now be once in 50 years. The once in 100 years flood might be once in 30 years. The math is changing faster than our psychology. The other thing that concerns me is the insurance situation. Private insurers are pulling out of California due to wildfire risk. As they leave, the flood insurance market could destabilize too. Premiums are rising as FEMA updates risk assessments to reflect reality. Some properties are becoming uninsurable or are only insurable at astronomical costs. If you can't get affordable insurance, can you really own that home long term? California is considering alternatives. Community-based flood insurance programs are being piloted in places like Istleton. Instead of individual policies, the entire community pools risk and resources. It's innovative but unproven at scale. Will it work in larger cities like Stockton or Sacramento? Nobody knows yet. The state could create its own flood insurance program, keeping more money in California for flood mitigation instead of sending it to the federal government. Between 1994 and 2015, Californians paid $3 billion more into the National Flood Insurance Program than they received in claims. That's $3 billion that could have funded better levees, home elevations, floodplain restoration.
So after diving deep into all this data, all these studies, all the history and projections, what's my take? Should you move to California's flood-prone cities? It depends entirely on your situation. If you're young, financially stable, working in a growing industry, looking to build wealth through homeownership, and willing to be smart about location and insurance, then yes, cities like Sacramento offer incredible value compared to coastal California. The quality of life is high, the opportunities are real, the risks are manageable if you're informed and prepared. If you're older, on a fixed income, can't afford flood insurance or unexpected costs, or just want peace of mind, then maybe look elsewhere. There are plenty of California cities with lower flood risk. Head to the hills, stick to higher elevations, pay the premium for coastal areas with less exposure. Your money goes further when disaster doesn't wipe it out. If you're somewhere in between, do your homework. Don't just trust the real estate agent saying everything's fine. Check the maps yourself. Multiple maps from multiple sources. Talk to longtime residents. Look at the city's flood protection investments and timelines. Calculate the true costs, including insurance. Think about worst-case scenarios honestly. And here's my biggest piece of advice. If you do buy in a flood-prone area, have a plan. Know your evacuation routes. Keep important documents in waterproof containers or digitized in the cloud. Have emergency supplies. Know where you'd go if you had to leave quickly. Have savings set aside for the deductible and displacement costs insurance won't cover. Make your home more resilient. Elevate mechanical systems and appliances. Install backflow valves on sewage lines. Grade your yard so water flows away from the foundation. Use flood-resistant materials in basements and ground floors. These modifications cost money up front, but save you multiples in avoided damage. Stay informed about weather and river levels. Sign up for emergency alerts. When warnings come, take them seriously. Don't wait until water's at your door to act. Leave early, take your valuables, find safe shelter. People die in floods when they underestimate the danger or wait too long to evacuate. And vote for leaders who take flood risks seriously. This is a collective problem requiring collective solutions. Individual preparation helps, but we need infrastructure investments, smart land use planning, and climate adaptation at city, county, and state levels. Your vote matters in determining whether these things happen. The future of California's flood-prone cities isn't written yet. Climate change is making things worse, but human ingenuity and investment can make them better. Which force wins depends on choices being made right now. As a potential resident, you're not just passively accepting whatever happens. You're part of the community that will determine the outcome. Will you buy in these cities despite the risks? That's your call to make. Just make it with eyes wide open. The risks are real and growing, but so are the opportunities and the solutions. Balance them honestly. Think long term. Prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. That's how you navigate living in a state where flooding is more common than earthquakes, but the lifestyle and opportunities keep drawing millions of people regardless. What happens next in Stockton, Sacramento, Redwood City, and dozens of other California flood-prone communities will shape the state's future. These cities aren't going anywhere. The question is whether they'll thrive despite their risks or struggle under them, and whether you'll be there to find out. Before you make any decision, before you sign any papers, ask yourself this. In 20 years, will I look back and feel good about this choice? Will my family be safe and secure? Will I have built the life I wanted despite the challenges? If you can honestly answer yes, then maybe it's worth the risk. If you can't, then maybe it's not. One thing's for certain, California's relationship with water has always been complicated. Too much in winter, too little in summer, floods and droughts, sometimes in the same year. Managing that has defined the state's development from the beginning. The cities that figure out this balance will prosper. The ones that don't will pay the price. Make sure you understand which side of that equation you're choosing. Make sure the dream home doesn't turn into a nightmare. And make sure that when the next big storm hits, you're ready. Because it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And now you know what you're getting into. The choice is yours. Choose wisely. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit that subscribe button for Discover Cities. We dig deeper into the real stories behind where we live, the risks nobody talks about, and the opportunities everyone's chasing. Because making the right move starts with having the right information.